Hi, good morning, everybody. Good afternoon or good evening, depending on whatever time zone you happen to be joining us in. This is a panel called Poetry from the Burma Spring Revolution. And with this poetry panel, we are also marking the anniversary of the military takeover in Burma, which happened a year ago. We specifically have panelists who can talk about poetry and its relationship to Burma's resistance movement, because we have panelists who are involved in a new book that is coming out called Picking Off New Shoots Will Not Stop Spring. So first of all, I'm Kenneth Wong. I'm Burmese language instructor, blogger, and also a contributor to this poetry anthology. And let's also meet the other panelists. First is Ko Ko Thett. Ko Ko Thett, will you say hello to the audience and tell us in a few words who you are and what you do, please?
Hello, my name is Ko Ko Thett. With Brian Harman, I am co-editor of the forthcoming anthology of essays and poems entitled Picking Off New Shoots Will Not Stop the Spring. Witness essays and poems from Burma, Myanmar, 1988-2021. Thank you.
Very good. Ko Ko Thett is also, of course, a well-known Burmese poetry translator among the Burmese poet community. He is known for his capable, sensitive, well-considered English translation of many contemporary Burmese poetry. And also the other panelist is Ma Thida. Ma Thida, welcome. A few words about yourself, please.
Hello, everybody. I'm Ma Thida, and I'm a writer, editor, and I wrote the piece, The Picking of New Shoots Will Not Stop the Spring, for this book. And I'm now at the Yale University as a research associate.
Very good. Let's start from the title. The title reminds me of a line that is usually attributed to Pablo Neruda, where he says, you can cut down all the flowers, but you cannot stop spring. So I wonder if the two of you can discuss the relationship to Pablo Neruda's line to your title. Shall we start with you, Ko Ko Thett, and then we'll go to Ma Thida?
Yes, Coconut. Yes, the title is definitely a nod to Neruda's line. You can cut down all the flowers, but you cannot stop the spring. But more importantly, the title is also the title of an essay by Ma Thida, who took, I think, the title from a rallying cry out of the spring protests. The literal translation of the rallying cry goes like, plucking leaves will not stop the spring. We think picking off new shoots will not stop the spring reflects the situation in Myanmar. It is more ambiguous. Picking off as in protesters were picked off by snipers. New shoots as in Generation Z or Generation Z. I'm not sure whether Myanmar protest leaders were familiar with Neruda, but they might as well be. After all, Neruda lived in Rangoon in colonial days, and probably Ma Thida can tell us more about the rallying cry itself.
So Ma Thida.
Well, I think, yeah, we notice all the young Generation Zs, they have been pretty much creative in the sense of the making messages throughout the protests. And then this is the blogger, they making this cry. And maybe since they are pretty much war learners, they may notice about the lines from the Neruda. Who knows? We really don't know who started this, using this cry as their message. And it's really hitting me. That's why I wrote my essays in that sense, you know, that's really telling the true essence of the Spring Revolution, because we have been facing all the bad atrocities throughout since last year. So, but the Spring Revolution is every single day it's going on till until now, and it's going to be going on until and unless the coup has over, something like that, you know. So it's really reflecting the true value and essence of the Spring Revolution, you know.
Very good. I'm glad that we are able to connect Neruda's line to Burma's Spring Revolution. Neruda, aside from having been to Rangoon as a staff member of the Chilean consulate, he also, of course, has to endure the cruel Pinochet dictatorship, just like the Burmese people are now. So if there is anything, if we draw inspiration from Neruda's line, that is incredible that we are able to connect the two different movements across time and across space. Let's talk about the role of poets in this resistance. Ko Ko Thett, unfortunately, a number of the poets that you personally know and I personally know, we have lost them because of their involvement in the resistance, in the early days of the resistance. Could you tell us about those that you can name? Because no longer risk to them since they are far beyond the reach of torture or arrest, because they have passed on. We can name some of them, but those that we cannot name, we will keep them anonymous. Tell us about some of the poets that are involved in the resistance.
Yes. Well, the murder of poets, Caveman and Kathy, are quite well known. And as for the reasons to their murder, I think recently Burmese author Wendy Loyo pointed out that in 2021, poets were targeted not for simply writing protest poetry, but mainly because they served as foot soldiers or leaders at anti-coup protests. So both Caveman and Kathy were protest leaders, and their leadership in resistance, combined with the power of their poetry and their charisma, became a force to be reckoned with by the junta. That's why they were targeted, in my opinion. So the death of Caveman strengthened, Kathy's resolve that he had to continue fighting. And Kathy had always been for nonviolence. But according to one of the poets who knew Kathy quite well, Sanyang U, Kathy became, one of those early advocates of armed resistance after he witnessed Caveman's murder. So in the case of poets who were jailed or seized in protest in Rangoon, they were jailed, arrested, and detained, not because they were the junta knew them, they were poets, simply because they were part of the protest. They were jailed, they were apprehended, during the protest. They were arrested along with other protesters. So they were arrested as members of public. Later, of course, the fact that they were poets became well known, and so on.
If you can also help us understand, Ko Ko Thett,
Yes.
This is, of course, the 2021 coup movement that prompted many of the poets into action. But it seems to me like poets and poetry have always been part of Burma's anti-authoritarian movement. I think about the late poets like Maung Chonwe, who wrote the poem "To Wilt is to Bloom," and he was clearly talking about when he wrote about flowers, to wilt is to bloom. If you pick one, two will spring up. Those lines, he was clearly talking about the 88. Perhaps the 88 students who were killed there. What's a historical perspective of poetry and revolution in Burma?
Well, Kenneth, yes, the history contest, I think we had to begin from the anti-colonial, days where
right.
I think the first proper political protest poetry or political poetry was penned by King Mai in the 1920s, in the late 1920s. So we had to look back into poetry as a means of protest against colonial rule. So the King Kuroma is still very much influential, even for modern poets like Kethi. So the resistance in our poetic tradition, I think, emerged out of these colonial conditions. And in the 1930s, there were Kisan poets who were considered nationalist poets as well, even though they were never polemical. Yeah.
Right,
So,
very good.
Yeah.
If I may add the clarification to those who might not be Burmese speakers, Kisan literally means to test the time, to test the
Yes.
era, right? Yeah,
Yes.
and that defines a particular era or time period or style of poetry, I guess.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm going to turn to you, Ma Thida, if I may. We look at student leader Meng Konai, who was a leader in 88's uprising and who also reprises his role in the anti-coup movement after the 2021 February coup movement. Most of the people know him as a distance, but when I look at him, he wrote really sensitive poems. One of the poems that he wrote is called Drawing, which is part of the Anthology. And he wrote, "Now that the pencil has been sharpened, draw a classroom or a newt. It's up to you. Let this land be strewn with swords and spear, or be blessed with flying doves. It's up to you. I assure you, dear child, if you look away because you hate battle scenes and bloody fights, no one will call you a coward. But, my child, you must put your name on whatever you choose to draw." When I read his lines like that, he is clearly a very talented poet, and that particular poem seems to anticipate the crisis that we are in now. Could you tell us about the relationship between literature and writers and resistant movements?
Well, it's also started since the independence era, we were against the British colonialism. And at that time, there are not so many new technologies. So even in the whole war, the literature or the print media is the only weapon for most of the unarmed population. So in that sense, on top of that, because of the very serious, heavy censorship throughout our history, especially, Meng Konai and I may be a little bit contemporary in our age, something like that. So in our days, there are very heavy censorship and there are no news media, private independent news media at all, only the state's media. So literature plays two roles, not just having literature itself in the aesthetic value or the its own intrinsic value, but also it's cover a couple of information. We cannot have any idea about what's going on in other part of the world, other part of our own country through the state's own media. So how can we learn what's going on in other part of the country, what's going on in the other states apart from the main capitals, something like that? It's just through short stories or poems or novels. It is delayed, because of this very heavy, long-lasting censorship process. It's delayed, but still we can learn. So that's make a lot of readers, ourselves, including Meng Konai, to inspire to use the platform of literature to either reflect the current what's happening, current affairs, or either to dig enough, what's the real essence of our value through literature. So that's why I think this literature is not just for resistance, it's just for reviewing ourselves, reflecting ourselves, or it's beyond everything, especially in our days. Now there are so many other new technologies, but in our days, because of the very limited space in arts, not just literature. I think all forms of arts, including literatures, turn out to be a little bit more like reflecting our feelings. But, because of this very long-term dictatorship, most of the general public having the sense of resistance whatsoever. So that's why reflecting ourselves means reflecting resistance. So the relationship between literature and resistance, it's throughout our history, it's never been separated.
Ma Thida, you wrote and published under the previous military dictatorship under the Ne Win government. I wrote, but I was never published when I was growing up in Burma. So did you know where the limits were? For example, if you write something, you have to submit it to the censor board. And if they don't like it, they reject you. And that's not that bad. But they might also think you are seditious and report you, and then you could get arrested. So do you know where the lines are? Do you know how far you can push it? Do you know where you need to watch out because it's no longer safe?
Well, it's hard to say, for me, I ever experience is, they are totally unpredictable. They call themselves press scrutiny board, so scrutinizers. They are, I might say, they are not well educated in my sense, So if they don't understand, they reject it, Simply since they don't understand, they feel very dangerous for them. If they let our pieces go, and then they might be in danger for that reason. So they just stop it. If they do understand, they also reject, because since they do understand, they can imagine this is dangerous piece towards the dictator, something like that. So the line is maybe not criticizing the ruling government. That's the pretty general message, But I might say, I keep saying this, all the challenges make us more able, so more creative then. So we always try to use so many, not just metaphor, but also, for example, like naming the characters. The bad characters are all the names similar to the dictators, or the names of the animals, something like that. So this is the common tactics the writers have been using, and it's relatively safer, So there are so many ways we can use our creativity in that sense, even though we know the limits are not very clearly cut. It's also pretty much sometimes personal, Some individual scrutinizers are easygoing, some individual scrutinizers are very anxious. So it depends on that. And then I might say the corruption plays a couple of rules in that. So especially during the socialist days, most of the scrutinizers they were very easily bribed, So, but from 1988 till the 2010-11, it's pretty hard. The bribing to get passing hands from the scrutinizer is very hard, because the way of the censorship has been pretty much improved, and the very complicated, ink over or ripped off or the glue two pages together. So many steps it took. So for the censorship, pre-printing censorship, post-printing censorship. So there are several steps of censorship making us very much creative, I might say, So it's not very easy, but well, I might have my say my old motto is don't give up until they give up.
Very good. Well, we do have a good collection of poetry and essays, thanks to Ko Ko Thett and his editor in this new anthology. So let's read some of them to give the audience a taste of what Burmese poetry and literature is like. If I may, I'm going to start off with a poem by the late Anthology, a former political prisoner who is known for, among other things, wearing his little blue prison shirt until the day he died because he wanted to show solidarity. Even after his release, he wanted to show solidarity with his colleagues and other political prisoners who still remain in jail. So this is his poem called Fearless Tiger, and it is part of the anthology. Fearless Tiger, Hantawadi Winter. Burning sun, pelting snow, sometimes the heat is prickly, sometimes the cold shakes me. My narrow living quarter sees no bright light, feels no wind blow, sees no sunshine nor no moonrise, sees no human nor humanity. Sit or gaze, sleep or think, can't get news, can't even sing a song, can't read, can't attempt poetry, can't preach, can't even speak to a soul. Samsara is empty, my world is tiny. I pace in my little space. I pause before the iron door. I stand for a bit and the day is gone. Gone was the day before, gone is the whole day, gone will be the next day. Gone, 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 get them all gone. A day or a life, a month or an age, a year or an era, I won't lose hope. I won't give up. Now I'm the anvil, later the hammer. Don't you know the truth is on my side? The people are on my side. Time stands by me and Buddha stands with me. Do you think I'll grow blunt in monotony like a caged tiger at the zoo? What a laugh. Remember, as long as the black stripes cut across my yellow bright, unmistakable and clear, a tiger is a tiger, and I am just the same. That's Hantawadi Uwintin. Ko Ko Thett, would you mind also sharing some poems that you feel like from your anthology, please?
Yes, Kenneth, that was a powerful reading. As you probably know, I also translated Winton's, part of Winton's autobiography and collage it to make it, contents, and like 2 pages, make it into 2 pages, and a collage of Winton's life is published in that anthology. But anyway, I like to read a poem by Maung Saung Kha. Maung Saung Kha is now a guerrilla, an insurgent fighter in a rebel camp in Burma. But he was a famous poet, well-known poet, especially he got to be known because he was arrested and detained for 6 months for one of his poems that says about his tattoo portrait of a president on his penis. So he was, and then I happened to witness Maung Saung Kha's trial in 2015-16 in Burma. So that was the first time ever I met him. He was in the dock. It was, a peculiar experience for me in Shubhita. And there are 2 poems by Maung Saung Kha in that collection. And I would like to read the second one, titled Who is That Guy?, which was published in Modern Poetry in Translation in 2018 in LGBTQ special focus. That poem, Who is That Guy?, is interesting because it's about obsession with a man by Maung Saung Kha, who is a man. So it's like he has a girlfriend, but he is obsessed with another man, and he cannot recall who that guy is. He is totally obsessed, and with this guy who shook his hand and so on. But that guy could also be a military intelligence officer chasing after him. So in that respect, the poem can be read in that way as well. Occupy him all the time. He doesn't know who's following him. And so on. So let me read the poem. And the poem is quite long, so I'll cut it short in the middle and just jump onto the end. Maung Saung Kha, who is that guy? I've just shaken his hand, but I don't know who he is. Looking left and looking right, I cross the road with a very busy mind, investigating my own past. Where the guy might have played a part. Who is that guy? Who is that guy? I am on my way to my girlfriend. All I am thinking all the way to my girlfriend is that guy. I am dying to see my girlfriend, but I must remember who he is. I have even unlocked my phone unnecessarily, thinking who that guy really might be. Because of that guy, I find myself unintentionally gawking at the backside of a woman who is walking in front of me. When I meet my girlfriend, the first thing I tell her is about the guy. I can't keep him out of my mind. The guy follows us into the bus. At the Love Hotel, thinking of that guy, I walk straight into my favorite room without checking in. I was almost humiliated. What's up with you today? You are not yourself. At the end of my girlfriend's remark, the guy pops up in front of me again. I cannot not think of that guy. I try to lock him out, but he has already locked me in. Caressing my girlfriend's breasts, I am thinking of that guy. After we have sex, I lie down flat on my back to relax. Guess what? That fucking asshole is standing right over me. So that's a poem. Yes.
Wonderful, wonderful. Of course, there is indeed double meaning to it. It's a contribution to the LGBTQ focused collection, yes. But at the same time, it also speaks a lot about how he always feels like somebody is watching over his shoulder, and he's obsessed with this idea of being monitored. Maussanka, I happen to know him online, but then he's also one of the people who was part of the documentary made by my friend Jeannie Marie Halassi called Badauk. Badauk follows a couple of ordinary Burmese people who have to make difficult decisions in the face of the coup, and Maussanka, we saw in that movie, make the decision to join the resistance and go into the jungle. Quite literally.
Yes.
So we really hope that at some point he would have the opportunity to write more poems again, because he's obviously very talented as a poet, also as a resistance member, of course. We do have more time, Ko Ko Thett. Is there perhaps another poem that you'd like to read, either partly or in whole? I'll leave it to you.
Yes, I was talking about Kathy. And the poem I would like to select for reading, part of a poem is called A Letter from a Caveman by Kathy. A Letter from a Caveman. The poem is dedicated to Ko Thett, who is a well-known poet, Monywa poet, a senior poet, and he runs a tea shop in Monywa, and Monywa poets such as Kathy Kizawin, who are, they are always there. Jizo A, Kathy, Kizawin, etc., etc. Junior Monywa poets. Ko Thett himself was a political prisoner, and he is very much respected in Monywa, as a, but he keeps a very low profile, and So when I go to Monywa, I'll go to his tea shop to meet up with poets, and this poem by Kathy is dedicated to Ko Thett, and I'm reading part of it. It's a long poem. From a Letter from a Caveman by Kathy. In the last ditch fight with my own shadow, if I cannot kill it, I know it will kill me. I dig through the depths of an abyss to look into my own chest. I find my body and soul ablaze. If not for Mita, I would have been reduced to ashes. Where are you? Where are you? I look for myself, forced to prescribe a meaning to my own existence. Ethic equals empathy. That's what I've learned. Just for a moment, The button cable tends to snap quite often. Just for a moment, I'm still changing the button cable. I'll be back. Heroically, I will be back. Not a hero who will knee the heavens in the groin. The hero who will kneel down to kiss the earth.
Wonderful, Ko Ko Thett. I remember something about Kethy. He reached out to me one day through Facebook and asked me to translate one of his long poem called The Black Holes of Bagaya. What I didn't know then is he also reached out to you and asked you to translate the same poem. So a couple of weeks later, we found out that he now had two English versions of the same poem, which made for a very good comparative study of the art of translation because we have two different takes on the same poem. So I'm thankful to him for that. Ma Thida, would you also mind reading something either from your essay or whatever you choose to that is part of the anthology?
Maybe. Yeah, this one, the picking of new shoots will not stop the spring. A couple of paragraphs, not all. It's quite a long one.
Sure.
Teen girls in white tops and jeans confidently hold a placard that reads, "Picking of leaves won't stop the spring." Their faces show neither anger nor sorrow. They look determined. They are also shouting, "We are youths, we have a future." They don't believe in anger or sadness, but they do believe in hope. That group of teen girls belong to tens of thousands of young people out on the streets in big and small cities, more than 300 all over Myanmar. Of course, they have hope. They voted in the general election in November 2020, mainly for the NLD, National League for Democracy. They are the 5 million strong of 5 first-time voters. Not all of them were happy with the NLD government during the 4 years prior to the election. However, most of them had voted for the NLD and now calling for the release of Aung San Suu Kyi and President U Win Myint. They also carry banners that demand "Free our leaders, respect our votes." They must have been overjoyed at having the chance to vote for the first time as responsible citizens. How can they be happy if their votes are not respected or recognized? They are fighting against the junta is not for the political party they voted for, but simply for their votes and their rights. A light truck is parked under the sun. Middle-aged men pack noodles into disposable lunch boxes, while a young man distributes lunch boxes to protesters under the shade of an overpass. 3 teen girls in Nike caps, trainers, and fancy dresses carry blue bin bags to collect throwaways directly from the hands of the people and rubbish from the street. 3 muscular men wait at a corner with their 3-wheel carts to dispose of refuse. The placards attached in front of their carts say, "We are no municipal workers. We are volunteers." On the other side of the road, out from the boots of a new SUV, some smart young men announce, "Water and fresh juice available here. Take what you want and leave your garbage here in this box." I will just go down a little bit. Those scenes are now the new normal on the streets of Myanmar. From 8 a.m. in the morning until 5 p.m. in the evening, tens of thousands of people are out on the streets. After 5 p.m., when the protests are over, no rubbish is left behind on the streets. From now on, the people of Myanmar might be reluctant to throw rubbish casually on the streets. A spring revolution, still going strong after 3 weeks and with no signs of abating, has introduced a new self-disciplined lifestyle to all generations and social groups. Almost a month into the protests, and there is no division based on class, gender, race, or religion. No bad words, no bad behavior, no looking down, no personal appraisals. There were almost no car accidents. Even when one did occur, it was solved amicably, not in the usual way with a quarrel or a fight. Only one common enemy, the military dictatorship, brought such diverse peoples together. Within our history, this is a rare moment of unity, discipline, determination, and cooperation. How dare someone say that the people of Myanmar do not deserve democracy? And I will go to the end of the essays. At least 15 people were killed by the end of February. The livelihood of thousands of civil servants is at great risk. The livelihood of the general public is also uncertain. A tree is shaken by a gust. Leaves fall prematurely. Nonetheless, who can stop the spring, the revolution?
Wonderful, wonderful. Ma Thida, can I ask about that scene that you're describing? Can I ask around what month after the coup that might have been?
But this is just February, because I wrote this piece in late February, very early March. Yeah. So.
That's right. Yeah. You contrast the fact that in your scene, there was a car accident, but it was solved amicably. And very recently, we had another car accident, which was quite intentional, where the military thugs actually drove a car literally into a protesting crowd to kill a number of people. And at the time you wrote that essay, you marked that 15 people had been killed, but by now the number is well over 1,000 now.
Yeah, sure.
Ko Ko Thett, you were trying to say something.
Oh yes, I received the essay in early March, and I think I still remember one of the earliest essays that, that was entered into this anthology, full of hope and full of inspirations.
Yes, yeah, wonderful. Let's talk. Let's go back to our discussion about poetry and its relationship to resistance movement. In the past, as Ma Thida has done, a lot of people resorted to kind of talking about the government and political situations in a roundabout way, or using symbols to hide the true criticism underneath the text. One has to read between the lines in order to understand that this is actually a resistance or a revolutionary piece of writing, not just a straightforward expository scene or a description of ordinary life. But in the more recent kind of writing, at least in the poetry era, it seems like they are writing very openly, very explicitly about their discontent with military rule. What are your thoughts on that? How do you think literature will change after the 2021 coup?
I do think literature has been a little bit changed already after the relaxation of the censorship, As soon as the press scrutiny board has been canceled, a lot of writing has been pretty much open compared to the past, So I think after the 2021, after the coup, I think it's much more open, because people cannot bear anything. People don't they are not interested in hiding anything behind. So for that reason, they are more open generally. And then I think also people also do learn about how to express freely during these relaxation years, So even though the situation of the freedom of expression or the artistic freedom has not yet that much improved as I expected, but the level of practicing their rights in terms of freedom of expression and others has been pretty much improved. For that reason, I think not just the writers, poets, and the other people, but also the general public itself, they're happy and they open to practice their rights. This is the good signs, even though we might not reach our expectation, but it's a pretty much improvement in Yeah.
That's true. When I was growing up, and we are talking about the mid 70s and the 80s, of course, there was no such thing as an open mic poetry reading or performance poetry or things like that. And so I was quite inspired and also pleasantly surprised to find them happening when I went back and visited in the last 10 years of partial democracy and partial civilian rule. Ko Ko Thett, could you also give us your reflection on how do you think poetry is going to change in response to the coup?
Yes, as Ma Thida mentioned, we have like nearly 10 years of, lifting of censorship, and also the introduction of the internet, which enabled most poets, all poets, to publish instantaneously. They just write and publish it instantly. So that, I think, broke down the barrier between the poets and the reader. So the poets publish it, and then the reader can read it instantly online, usually on social media. So that's how, I think the media can actually influence the mode of writing, the mode of thinking, and all these things. The media may be the message, as Marshall McLuhan says. And this influenced a big deal, the way the Burmese poets wrote and reflected on the situation and so on. But after from 2010 to 2020, there was a diversity of messages and poetry and diverse forms, diverse messages, and all those diverse voices in poetry. But after 2021, it narrows down to anti-coup poems, fight or flight, right or wrong, foes and friends, and so on. That's one kind of poem. The other kind is like call to arms, like Iza Win and a number of other dissident poets. We must fight, we must take up arms and never surrender, and in a way much more simplified and direct. And other kinds are like lyrical poems about daily life by Mi Chang-wei, who wrote beautifully about a neighborhood terrorized by the military thugs, and so on. So there are different types of poems, but they all converge into this one entity called military regime. Yeah. So in that sense, the diversity has been limited, but then again, that's the reality. Yeah.
Which is why it's very appropriate that you actually call your collection a collection of witness poetry and writings, because it is actually bearing witness to the era, the time that we're living in.
Yes, pretty much, yeah.
So Ko Ko Thett and Ma Thida, to round us off, Ko Ko Thett, would you mind giving us one more time the details of the book and when it will be released and other details?
Oh yes, the book is called Picking Off New Shoots Will Not Stop the Spring. Witness Poems and Essays from Myanmar, 1988, 2021. And it will be released very soon, on 29th January. The ebook will be made available free of charge. And to round it off, I would like to tell an anecdote about the very first anthology of poetry in the world. About 500 years before Jesus Christ, Confucius, the Chinese sage, was commissioned to come up with an anthology of folk songs and poems by the Chinese emperor, because the Chinese emperor wanted to learn what people were thinking. So to be able to learn what people were thinking, he must read what people were writing, the folk songs and poetry. So that's the first, that's supposed to be the very first anthology of poetry in the world. And of course, we did that too, to reflect what people are thinking, but we didn't get any commission or anything. We just did it gratis, free of charge, and we were just driven by, by the need to topple the military regime and so on. Yeah.
Very good, very good. Every day I still see new poems showing up on Facebook.
Exactly,
Previously, of course, to be published means you submit your poem or your essay to a magazine editor, and then you hope that they'll like it, so it'll appear in the first 10 or 12 pages of a lifestyle magazine like Kalea or Pebuzwa or Maheti. But today, you just press print after you write it on Facebook, and then your audience immediately sees it. Ma Thida, any last words or any reflections between literature and Burma Spring Revolution?
Well, I think the literature always plays its role in any kinds of resistance or revolution. And this is a very tricky part, as the Ko Ko Thett says. I might say after the coup, our freedom of expressions and our rights has been pretty much limited. And then our creativity also sometimes limited because of, naming either phone or friends, something like that. This kind of the environment is indeed totally unfavorable for keeping the intrinsic value of the arts, especially the literature. It is not good. So this anthology, it's already reflect the situations quite vividly, saying some people cannot go beyond the current very extreme atrocity just as witnessing that. But, on the other hand, other people try to find ways to practice their freedom of opinion, So sometimes it is pretty much hard to imagine whether we should still keep the intrinsic value of the arts in our pieces, our work during this period, or shall we just reflect or respond? Most of the times, even though the writers or poets they do their job individually, they don't need anything, they don't need any other persons, but they do reflect the whole universe. So that's why I think in this era, especially as you all said, the work can be reach out directly to the audience without crossing the editor's table or deck, something like that. But at the same time, it is up to us, how much we could maintain the real intrinsic value of the arts, at the same time reflecting our responsible response, very responsible response to what's happening right now in this very world, something like that. So it's pretty much like, at the same time, the digital platform making us very responsible, indeed. At one hand, it may be seen as, we don't need to worry about that. It is, for me, it's pretty much, in this digital era, the writers are very responsible. We normally say words are not crimes, but as a manipulator of vocabularies, words, grammar, etc., writers are responsible for everything, not just responding to the atrocities, So maybe it's depending on our choice, That's also the freedom of choice, freedom of practicing our rights is very much obvious, even in this dark era, I might say.
Very good, very good. We have a lot more freedom because of the digital age we live in, but that also means we have a lot more responsibility and a lot more difficult choices to balance. Thank you very much Thank you very much, both of you, for joining us for this conversation. I appreciate it. This is, as I've mentioned before, part of the Burma Spring Benefit Film Festival, a festival that shows and documents ordinary lives and dramatic events that happen in the country. So if you can watch some of the films that you like to learn more about Burma and also make a donation to support the peaceful resistance movement against the military regime, I would appreciate it. Until next time, I'm Kenneth Wong, and we are out.